It's like a classic Indian dish.
I've been to India. I haven't seen food like that.
It's Northern Indian.
Northern Indian.
I believe, yeah, Northern Indian.
So I started off this series by talking about the perception of Indiana Jones in Germany. And I concluded that unless you want to kiss silly mustache man on the lips and marry him, practically nobody has a problem with Indiana Jones in the arse kicking of the Nazis. Not every indie adventure concerns them, but that's the general perception. There were some insightful comments that I want to highlight that gave additional context. That there is an obsession with pretending people in Germany either secretly oppose silly mustache man or were ignorant to his crimes. The worst crimes, yes, absolutely. But the red flags were already there, with the tyrannical oppression of the Jewish people and other groups. But that's a discussion for another time. Now I wanted to shift our attention away from Germany and focus on the next relevant country, India, one of the world's most populated countries and host to a rich and extensive culture. From the Indus Valley to British imperialism, India is an interesting country. When Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was being made, George Lucas had a great fascination with the country and wanted Indy's next adventure, or prior adventure more like, since Temple of Doom is a prequel, take place primarily in India. A bunch of actors entrenched in Bollywood even took to acting in this production. Key of which is Amrish Puri, a prolific Indian actor best known in the West for his role in Indiana Jones as Mola Ram, the sadistic leader of the Thuggee cult. Though in India himself, he is better remembered for roles local to his homeland, though he passed away in 2005, so any modern Indian films he would not be remembered for. But enough setup. Let's go over what the Indian people thought of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. If you want the short answer, they hated it. Long answer, well, there's a lot of reasons India wasn't fond of Temple of Doom. You may have even heard that while it was in production, it was being shot within the country of Sri Lanka, because Hindi authorities detested the film's script, as they saw it as an offensive, negative portrayal of their religion and society. And it's easy to see why. You see, the film was largely seen as stereotypical through the British Empire. If you remember the film itself, the two most emphasized aspects of Indian society was a poor but humble village and the Thuggee cult, the antagonists of the film, who were the utmost extremes of sadism and evil. I mean, after all, the most infamous scene, the heart extraction shall we call it, completely changed the rating system in the United States itself. It is worth noting that Temple of Doom was reflective of the moods of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas respectively. That being said, it seems most of the coverage on the Temple of Doom in India was largely negative. While the film's actual quality as a film was a completely different story, Indian critics took major issue with the portrayal of just about everything related to India. One of the most notable critics was Satyajit Ray, who was himself a filmmaker, and a revered one at that, said that aside from the first 10 minutes, he dismissed the film very harshly as unbelievably bad. Many also blamed the movie for many foreigners mistaking the disgusting meals depicted in the movie for actual Indian cuisine. Now, in Spielberg and Lucas's defense, they would say the scene was actually a joke, meant to prank Willie and Short Round into thinking the food they served in India was actually the sort of crap Westerners think they'd serve. And really, it was a misunderstood scene. The problem was that the film didn't make this explicitly obvious, and you could still argue that even under that mindset, it was culturally inaccurate for them to serve chilled monkey brains as a meal in jest. Because similar to cows, monkeys are off limits when it comes to food. So the idea that they'd kill a bunch of monkeys for this reason is iffy. Although I think in the film's defense, Pankot Palace was infested with the Thuggee cult and was sacrilegious to Hinduism at its extreme, which is why Mola Ram has a cow skull as a hat. It's also worth noting that in the film itself, the food the villagers gave Indian friends were definitely more in line with Indian cuisine than the food at Pankot Palace. Plus, it's shown in a later scene that Pankot Palace did indeed have normal food. So I think the film does have a reasonable defense in terms of its content in regards to its representation of Indian food, especially since canonically, it was a prank in universe. Still, since the movie never made it explicitly obvious, Indians back then and to this day have to deal with stupid foreigners thinking that they eat these disgusting meals. So if I had to give a point personally on who is right and who is wrong, I'd say the movie is wrong for creating or at least aiding the stereotype that Indian food is unappetizing. Now let's talk about the bad guys, the Thuggee cult, which were also subject to ridicule. While the Thuggee are generally remembered as not being the nicest folks around, as they resorted to robbery and other petty crimes, they were not engaging in human sacrifice. That part was completely made up. So the portrayal of the Thuggee cult is completely wrong, and the Indian perception of it was very poor to say the least. I suppose another thing to note is that the depiction of the goddess Kali, who may or may not be the overarching antagonist of the film. Now it is worth noting that the Indiana Jones franchise later gave a more accurate portrayal of Kali through the Young Indy Chronicles, but when it comes to the film itself, religious Hindus and the Indian people in general really hated the portrayal of Kali. Now, to describe Kali's actual role in the Hindu religion, she is typically thought of as a fierce but protective goddess, encouraging knowledge, freedom, and all that fun stuff. She is also thought of as divine and a destroyer of evil. Now, while Kali's imagery is fearsome to the initial naked eye, it's meant to represent toughness and strength rather than sadism and cruelty. And that's where a lot of locals thought Temple of Doom went wrong. While the Thuggee cult are acting of their own accord to worship Kali in the way they do, it does give the picture to any lay people that Kali is a god of destruction, misery, and death, when Kali is anything but. I think I should also mention that Shiva, by extension, is equally complex. As while Shiva is a god of destruction in a way, it's nuanced where Shiva embodies values such as recreation, compassion, justice, and a lot of other things. So contrary to what the film betrays, the contrast between Shiva and Kali is not one of good versus evil, but rather of contrasting but equally important values in the Hindu religion. Now, I am by no means an expert on religion. I personally identify as a-religious, not explicitly atheist, because I think God certainly could exist, but until God proves he exists definitively, I cannot believe in him in good faith. I was also not raised religiously. I never went to church, so I hope I did a good job explaining both Shiva and Kali in an accurate, if oversimplified way. To be honest, the Young Indy episodes seem to try and represent Hinduism better than Temple of Doom. So with that being said, that's the antagonist and the representation of religion. There are a lot of other aspects to talk about, such as the costumes, landscapes, etc. So when it comes to the costumes, they are perceived as not necessarily wrong, but reflective of serious attire of the Indian people, and are more so seen as a way for the filmmakers to represent Indian clothing, rather than something Indians actually wear in their day-to-day lives, rich or poor. Still, there wasn't much controversy surrounding the costume design I could find, so it is safe to assume that the reception is one of indifference. I should also mention that the film was seen as a classic example of the white savior trope, where Indiana Jones beats up the bad guys and frees dozens upon dozens of child slaves, all of them not white. Keep in mind, India historically was under the realm of the British Empire, and needless to say there was a lot of contention. Not much of this relates to the movie directly, but the British are depicted as secondary good guys, as they arrive to help eliminate the Thuggee cult for good. But a lot of Indians blame the British Empire for the stereotypes made about them to begin with. I should mention by extension that despite Winston Churchill's popular legacy in the United Kingdom and the West in general, India absolutely hated him because of his negligence surrounding the Bengal famine and how he treated India before, during, and after World War II. British imperialism is not explored at all in the movie, so it probably isn't relevant directly, but we have the British imperialists most of all for all these stereotypes that found their way to Temple of Doom. Now, to once again answer the question of what India thought of the Temple of Doom, it's largely negative. Whether you're an average Joe in India or you're mega religious, you probably thought the portrayal of India was either disgusting at worst or tone deaf at best. Even if you look at those who liked the film, for example Amrish Puri, who as mentioned before played Mola Ram, he still acknowledged that this film was stereotypical stereotypical, although he saw the stereotypes and inaccuracies as silly, and was more so the sort of thing to kind of laugh at. It's still undeniable, however, that Temple of Doom did not help external perceptions of India, and led to small-scale racist perceptions at best. Young Indy may have tried to reverse it, but by then it was too little, too late. India already had a lot of negative stereotypes not portrayed in the movie, such as being the home of scam callers next to Nigeria, it having too many people, it being poor, and also most of the population having an easy shutdown button on their foreheads. Okay, that last one is a joke, but you get the point. India in the West is often looked down on, and the Temple of Doom did not flatter India whatsoever. That being said, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is still an awesome movie. I still think the late Amrish Puri was right to see the portrayal of India as silly, and to view it as a foreigner's wacky perception of his country. Because India certainly wasn't the first, and it certainly won't be the last when it comes to American movies getting things wrong. I can tell you as an Australian that we don't ride kangaroos, and we certainly don't eat our burgers upside down. Those stereotypes and jokes are really annoying, but they're not the end of the world, and it's better to laugh with it than to vent red with anger. So all in all, the Indian perception of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was basically the polar opposite to that of Germany in relation to the first and third movies. India banned the Temple of Doom for many years before they allowed it on home video. And even then, the film was met with such apathy. Those directly involved in the film, like Amrish Puri, saw the stereotypes as silly and came to the film's defense, while others just saw it as disgraceful in a bad mood and tone deaf in a good mood. Could the Temple of Doom have made changes? Absolutely. But I think there's also an aspect to say that Temple of Doom is more interesting because of its portrayal of India. While it's held against the movie, the film's positive qualities are also notable enough that the two conflict with each other, and it makes the Temple of Doom a more interesting experience than the other Indy films. Because this one wasn't a critically acclaimed sequel prequel in its day after all. And I think the Temple of Doom persevered despite the cultural inaccuracies. And one can argue that the shock value and stereotypes are part of its charm. You also gotta recognize that Raiders also got a lot of things wrong about its portrayal of certain groups. The Nazis didn't care about the Ark. America probably wouldn't be trying to counteract Germany in the manner in which they did, and the evil Nazis were not realistically evil. But I think it's because the Nazis were so terrible and vilified beyond belief that German audiences didn't have objections to it. But I think it's because the Nazis were so terrible and vilified beyond belief that German audiences didn't have objections to it. In contrast, Hinduism is a huge part of India today. It is portrayed as black and white rather than complex, and the film is full of inaccuracies that led outsiders to genuinely see India as backwards, in contrast to foreigners who might visit Germany and not think of everyone as silly mustache man's bitch. Stereotypes about Germany include sausages and alcohol, not exactly harmful in all honesty. India is arguably more significant than Germany, due to its extended history and culture, and it's something that Temple of Doom fumbled in most of people's eyes. So that's my explanation of how India sees Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. If there are any Indians watching, I would appreciate to hear your own answers, as it will help us understand your nation and culture all the more. Oh, and if you're wondering what Chinese audiences thought of the intro to Temple of Doom, depicting Shanghai, from what I could find, the portrayal of China's largest city was seen as stereotypical, a derivative off of Western stereotypes too. But such stereotypes were easily forgivable as silly Americans thinking that kids can drive cars. And given it's only 10 minutes of the movie, it's negatable compared to India. China didn't allow the film for the longest time because, you know, communism. But when it was allowed, the reception was under the radar for the most part. Not that many resources on Chinese perceptions of the Shanghai intro are available. So that's my explanation on what the Indian perception of Temple of Doom is. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories with mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain. Were you praying that the law is strong?